November 14th, 1945. 14 hours. Processing Center H3, Northern California. The warehouse smells of damp sawdust, unwashed wool, and the sharp chemical tang of DDT powder. Outside, the Pacific wind howls against the corrugated steel siding, but inside, the silence is suffocating. Keiko Tanaka stands rigid in the line, her knuckles white as she clutches the rough fabric of her issued trousers. She watches the American quartermaster, a sergeant with heavy eyelids and a clipboard, moving down the row of wooden crates. Thump, thump, scratch. He places a box, checks a list, and scribbles. To Keiko, this is the prelude to execution. The propaganda had been clear. Americans were beasts who toyed with their prey before the kill. Crate 42, shortage, the sergeant barks. His voice echoes. Keiko flinches. The young girl beside her, Aiko, begins to tremble. The sergeant turns, walking heavily toward them. Keiko steps forward, shielding Aiko, bracing for the blow, perhaps a rifle butt. Instead, the sergeant reaches past her, grabs a sealed tin of Klim-powdered milk from a reserve stack, and jams it into the open box. He looks at Keiko, tapping the paper manifest with a grease pencil. "Inventory," he grunts, pointing to the Geneva Convention stamp on the box. "It has to match the list, or my captain will have my hide." He marks a check. The bureaucratic precision is terrifyingly banal. It isn't cruelty, it is accounting. If you enjoy historical deep dives like this, please subscribe and comment which country you are watching from. 6 weeks earlier, the port of San Francisco. The canvas flap of the 6-6 truck whipped violently against the frame, cracking like a pistol shot with every gust of wind. Inside, the air was thick with the nausea-inducing cocktail of diesel exhaust, dust, and the unwashed bodies of 20 women. Keiko Tanaka sat near the tailgate, her back pressed against the vibrating steel. She did not look at the others. As the senior nurse, she had forbidden them from crying 3 days ago. Tears dehydrated the body. Tears signaled weakness. Tears invited the predator. Through the gap in the canvas, she saw only the gray blur of the American coastline. It was a desolate, alien landscape. No bamboo, no rice paddies, just concrete roads and endless rows of wooden telephone poles that looked like crosses planted in the earth. "Tanaka-san?" A whisper came from her left. It was Aiko, the youngest. Her eyes were wide, darting around the truck bed. "Where are they taking us? The woods?" Keiko gripped Aiko's wrist, hard. "Quiet," she hissed in Japanese. "Do not speculate. It wastes energy." But Keiko knew, or she thought she knew. The rumors in the Pacific holding cells had been vivid. The Americans, giant, hairy men who ate raw meat, did not keep prisoners, especially not women. They were being taken to a secluded place. The truck gears ground down with a mechanical scream. They were slowing. Keiko felt for the small, jagged shard of glass she had sewn into the hem of her trousers. It was her final authority. If the soldiers came for them, if they tried to drag them into the bushes, she would use it. Not on them, on herself. The vehicle lurched to a halt. The silence that followed was heavier than the engine's roar. Clank, rat, the chain on the tailgate dropped. The canvas was thrown back, flooding the dark bay with blinding gray afternoon light. "Everybody out! Let's go! Let's go!" The voice was harsh, barking in English. A towering figure stood there, an MP. Keiko saw the white letters MP on his black armband. He wore a helmet that covered his eyes in shadow, and on his hip, slung low and heavy, was a .45 caliber automatic pistol in a leather holster. The flap was unbuttoned. Keiko stood up first. Her legs were numb. She adjusted her dirty tunic, pulled her shoulders back, and nodded to the women. "Dignity," her posture said. "Die with dignity." She stepped to the edge of the truck bed. The MP reached up a hand to help her down. Keiko froze. She looked at the large, gloved hand, then at the gun, then at the man's face. He was chewing gum, his jaw working rhythmically, indifferent. She ignored the hand and jumped. She landed hard on the gravel, her knees buckling slightly, but she did not fall. She stood, waiting for the blow, waiting for the shout. The MP just pointed to a painted white line on the asphalt. "Line up, tags out." He didn't even look at her. He was looking at a clipboard. Keiko touched the cardboard tag tied to her buttonhole. Prisoner 7304. She wasn't a woman to him. She wasn't an enemy warrior. She was inventory. And for the first time in months, the cold grip of terror in her stomach was replaced by something colder and far more confusing: indifference. The processing center did not smell of blood. It smelled of an aggressive chemical cleanliness. An hour after the trucks, Keiko and the others stood naked in a tiled room. A stark white powder coated their hair and skin like frost. The American medics, wearing masks and wielding DDT dusting guns, had pumped the insecticide down their collars and into their hair with the efficiency of factory workers painting car parts. Keiko shivered, clutching her issued gray dress, a shapeless sack of cotton. She did not wipe the powder from her neck. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her discomfort. By evening, they were corralled into Barracks 4. It was a wooden structure with tar paper roofing, holding rows of canvas cots. On each cot lay a brown cardboard box. Ration, Type K, supper unit. "Food," Aiko whispered, picking up the wax-dipped brick. Her hands trembled as she tore the outer seal. "Real food." "Stop!" Keiko commanded. Her voice cracked like a whip across the quiet room. The other women froze. Aiko held a small tin of meat spread halfway to her mouth. "Do not eat it all," Keiko said, walking down the aisle. She snatched the box from Aiko's hand. Inside, nestled beside the tin, were biscuits, a packet of bouillon, and a small fruit bar. "This is a trick. They feed us today to make us docile. Tomorrow, the trucks may not come. Tomorrow, we may be in the woods." She broke a single biscuit in half and handed a piece back to Aiko. "Eat this. Hide the rest in your mattress. When the starvation starts, you will thank me." The women obeyed, chewing the dry, salty crackers in silence. The taste of salt, pure, abundant salt, was overwhelming after months of cassava roots and watered-down rice. Suddenly, the barracks door banged open. A young private, no older than 19, stepped in. He carried a metal trash can. He didn't have a gun, only a broom. He looked at the women, then at the floor where Aiko had dropped the wax packaging of the K-ration. Keiko stiffened, stepping in front of Aiko. "Here it comes," she thought, "the punishment for the mess." The private sighed, rolling his eyes. He walked over, picked up the wax paper, and tossed it into his bin. Then he pointed to the half-eaten tins of meat some women were holding. "Finished?" he asked, miming a tossing motion. "Trash. Garbage." Keiko stared at him. He wanted them to throw away the tins. The metal alone was valuable. The residue of fat inside could flavor a soup for a week. "No," Keiko said in broken English, clutching the tin. "Keep?" The private shrugged. "Suit yourself, lady. Just don't let the ants get it." He swept a pile of dust that Keiko would have sifted for lost grains of rice, out the door and into the night. He closed the door, leaving them in the dark. Keiko sat on her cot, the unopened fruit bar heavy in her hand. The Americans were not just cruel. They were insane. They dusted prisoners like crops and threw away metal. It was a careless, terrifying abundance. She shoved the food under her pillow, her heart hammering against her ribs. They were not being starved. They were being drowned in things they could not understand. 3 days later, the routine of the camp was broken not by a siren, but by a piece of paper. It appeared during the morning roll call. tacked onto the rough plywood of the mess hall notice board. A bright white sheet, stark against the weathered wood. A red cross, a thick, blood-colored plus sign, sat at the top header. The women circled it warily, like a pack of deer approaching a trap. They looked to Keiko. Keiko stepped forward, her eyes narrowing against the glare. She read English, a skill she had hidden from the guards, a remnant of her university days before the nationalism took hold. Notice to all internees, the bold type read, "Pursuant to Article 37 of the Geneva Convention, 1929, a distribution of individual relief parcels will commence on Nov 14. Keiko stared at the words, Geneva Convention. The phrase tasted like ash. In the field hospitals of the Pacific, she had seen what American flamethrowers did to bunkers. There were no conventions in the jungle. "What does it say, Tanaka-san?" Aiko asked, tugging at Keiko's sleeve. "Is it a transfer? Are we leaving?" Keiko looked at the young faces around her. Hope was dangerous. Hope made you careless. "It says," Keiko lied smoothly, lowering her voice, "that on November 14th, there will be an inspection. We are to receive equipment." "Equipment?" an older woman asked. "Supplies," Keiko corrected, her mind racing. "Relief parcels." Why? To take photos? To show the world how civilized the Americans were before working them to death? Or perhaps the boxes contained labor uniforms. "Do not be fooled," Keiko whispered, turning her back to the board. She saw a guard watching them, a corporal chewing on a toothpick, leaning against the fence. He looked bored, always so bored. "The Red Cross is a Christian trick," she hissed to her group. "They give you a blanket so you feel warm. Then they ask for your soul, or your secrets." She looked back at the paper. The red ink of the cross looked less like a symbol of aid and more like a target. "Prepare yourselves," she commanded, walking away. "Whatever is in those boxes, we will not show gratitude. We will not smile. We take it, and we survive it." But as she walked, the date burned in her mind. November 14th. The enemy had given them a schedule, and for Keiko, the certainty of a date was more terrifying than the chaos of the unknown. November 14th brought a cold, driving rain. The guards marched the women out of the barracks, their boots squelching in the mud, towards the massive corrugated steel structure at the edge of the camp, Sector H3. Keiko kept her head down, squinting against the rain. She expected an interrogation room, or a medical bay for experimentation. "Halt!" The column stopped before the warehouse sliding doors. They were 2 stories high, riding on heavy iron tracks. A sergeant waved his hand, and 2 soldiers heaved the doors open. The sound was like thunder, metal grinding on metal, revealing the cavernous interior. Keiko looked up, and her breath hitched in her throat. She stopped breathing. It was not a torture chamber. It was a cathedral of cardboard. Inside, stacked on wooden pallets that reached 20 feet toward the steel rafters, were boxes, thousands of them, tens of thousands. They formed a maze of aisles, a city of identical brown cubes, extending as far as the dim electric lights could reach. "Move along, single file." Keiko stepped into the dry air of the warehouse, her legs heavy. The smell was different here. It smelled of sawdust, roasted coffee, and dry paper. She looked to her left. A stack of crates was stamped "Soap, Ivory," a mountain of soap, enough to wash her entire division back home for a year. To her right, cigarettes, Lucky Strike, cases upon cases. In the Pacific, her hospital had run out of bandages in 1944. They had boiled rags. They had reused needles until they were blunt hooks. Men had died because they lacked a single vial of morphine. And here, the enemy stored chocolate and tobacco in towers that scraped the ceiling. "It's a lie," she whispered, but her voice lacked force. The sheer physical reality of the warehouse crushed her argument. This wasn't a prop. You couldn't fake this volume. Aiko was walking with her mouth open, her eyes wide and wet. "Keiko-san," she whimpered, "there is no end to it." Keiko felt a wave of vertigo. This was how they lost the war. Not by spirit, not by bravery. They were buried under an avalanche of cardboard boxes. The Americans didn't just defeat them. They outproduced them so effortlessly that they could afford to warehouse luxuries for prisoners. "Keep moving," Keiko snapped, but her hands were shaking. She gripped her tunic to hide the tremor. The monster wasn't a beast with fangs. It was a factory that never slept. The aisle of boxes funneled into a choke point, a folding wooden table staffed by a corporal with thick glasses and a receding hairline. The rhythm of the line was hypnotic and terrifying. Step, murmur, scratch, rip, step, murmur, scratch, rip. Keiko watched the woman ahead of her, Mrs. Sato, tremble as she held a pen. Mrs. Sato looked back at Keiko, eyes pleading, before scratching a jagged X on the paper. The corporal didn't look up. He tore the top sheet off with a sharp zip, impaled it on a metal spike, and waved her through. Now it was Keiko's turn. She stepped up to the table. On it lay a stack of forms. War Department Form 19, Individual Issue Record. The paper was thin, layered with blue carbon sheets. "Name?" the corporal asked. He was smoking a cigarette, the ash dangerously long, defying gravity. "Tanaka, Keiko," she said, her voice tight. "Rank, head nurse." "Just the name, lady," he muttered. He wrote it down in the ledger, his handwriting looping and lazy. Then he spun the clipboard toward her. "Sign at the bottom, acknowledging receipt." Keiko stared at the English text. It was dense legalese. "I hereby certify that I have received the articles listed." She froze. In her mind, a signature was a contract. Was she signing a confession? Was she agreeing to be transferred to a labor camp? In the Imperial Army, you signed your name only on your enlistment papers and your death certificate. I cannot," Keiko said, gripping the edge of the table. The warehouse went quiet. The women behind her held their breath. Aiko shifted nervously. Keiko braced herself. She expected the corporal to shout. She expected the MP standing by the wall to unholster his baton. Instead, the corporal sighed, a long, rattling exhalation of pure fatigue. He took the cigarette out of his mouth and tapped the ash into a tin can. "Look," he said, tapping the paper with the nib of his Parker 51, "I got 400 more of you to process before chow. It ain't a confession. It just says, I gave you a box so the captain don't yell at me for losing inventory. Just sign the damn paper." He wasn't angry. He was inconvenienced. Keiko looked at him. He didn't care who she was. He didn't care about the war. He cared about his lunch break. The banality of his indifference struck her harder than a slap. She was prepared to be a martyr. She was not prepared to be a nuisance. Slowly, she took the pen. The barrel was warm from his hand. She wrote her name in kanji, the strokes sharp and defiant. "Good enough," the corporal grunted. He ripped the pink carbon copy off and handed it to her. "Move along. Next." Keiko took the pink slip. It was flimsy, translucent, a receipt for her existence. She walked forward, feeling strangely smaller. Keiko moved to the long trestle table. A sergeant with sleeves rolled up to his biceps stood behind a wall of cardboard boxes. He didn't hand her the package. Instead, he pulled a knife from his belt, slit the tape, and folded back the flaps. "Inventory check," he muttered. "Watch closely." Keiko stiffened. Here it is, she thought. This is where they spit in the food. But the sergeant's hands were quick and surgical. He reached into the box and began laying items onto the wooden table, one by one, ticking them off a printed manifest. Thud. A heavy silver tin. Klim, powdered whole milk. The metal was polished, reflecting the overhead lights. No dents, no rust, thud, a rectangular tin. Spam, Hormel Foods. Slap, a bar wrapped in red and white paper. Nestle's milk chocolate. Keiko stared. Her stomach twisted violently. This was not prison rations. This was a feast. The chocolate alone would have cost a month's wages in Tokyo before the fire bombings. Soap, 2 bars, the sergeant intoned, placing 2 creamy white cakes of swan soap on the wood. The scent of artificial roses wafted up, overpowering the smell of the warehouse dust. Then he tossed a tiny, hinged piece of metal onto the pile. It clattered. Opener, can, hand, folding, type 1, he recited. The soldiers called it a P-38. Put it back, he ordered, gesturing to the box. Keiko hesitated. Her hands felt dirty, reaching for such clean things. She touched the chocolate bar. It was solid, real. She placed it back in the box. Then the milk. Then the soap. It was perfect. It was terrifyingly perfect. If they treated their prisoners like this, how well did they feed their own troops? The thought was a crushing weight. The lie she had told herself, that the Americans were struggling, that the war was close, shattered against the hard reality of a tin of Spam. Next, the sergeant barked. Keiko grabbed her box, clutching it to her chest like a shield. She stumbled a few steps away, waiting for Aiko. Aiko stepped up. She was trembling so hard the table shook when she leaned against it. The sergeant grabbed the next box in, the stack, box 42. He slit the tape. He opened the flaps. He reached in for the milk. He set it down. He reached for the soap. He set it down. He reached for the chocolate. His hand stopped. He groped around the bottom of the box. He frowned, his thick eyebrows knitting together. He picked up the manifest list. He looked at the box. He looked at the list again. The rhythm of the warehouse, step, murmur, scratch, suddenly died. "Hold it," the sergeant said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Shortage." The silence in the warehouse was instant and suffocating. It rippled outward from table 4 like a shockwave, silencing the shuffle of boots and the tearing of cardboard. The sergeant stood over box 42, his finger pressed against the paper manifest. "Shortage," he repeated, louder this time. Aiko made a sound, a tiny, strangled whimper, and took a step back. She looked at Keiko, her eyes wide with the panic of a trapped animal. Keiko dropped her own box. It hit the floor with a dull thud. She didn't care. She moved. "She did not steal!" Keiko shouted, stepping between Aiko and the sergeant. She bowed her head aggressively, shielding the younger girl. "I am responsible. Punish me." Keiko braced herself. She tightened her stomach muscles, waiting for the rifle butt. She waited for the accusation that they were thieves, saboteurs, ungrateful wretches. Here it is, she thought. The mask falls off. The sergeant blinked. He looked at Keiko, then at the cowering Aiko, and finally down at his clipboard. He looked confused. "Steal?" he grunted. "Nobody stole nothing, lady. The packers just missed a can." He turned his head and bellowed toward the back of the warehouse, his voice booming off the steel rafters. "Yo, Miller, get me a Klim tin. Box 42 is short." Keiko froze. She didn't lower her arms. Her brain could not process the information. He is calling for a replacement. A young private came jogging over, clutching a silver tin of Klim powdered milk. He tossed it to the sergeant. Clack! The sergeant caught it one-handed and jammed it into the open space in Aiko's box. It fit perfectly. He picked up his grease pencil and made a thick, decisive check mark on the list. "Inventory," he muttered, more to himself than to them. He tapped the Geneva Convention stamp on the side of the box. "List says 12 items. Box gotta have 12 items, or the captain will have my hide." He shoved the box toward Aiko. "All yours, kid. Move it." Keiko stood there, her arms slowly dropping to her sides. The adrenaline that had surged to prepare her for death now had nowhere to go, leaving her dizzy. There was no malice. There was no mercy either. There was only the list. The American soldier did not hate them enough to starve them, and he did not love them enough to save them. He simply followed the procedure. To him, Aiko was not an enemy to be crushed. She was a recipient on a line, and the line had to balance. Keiko looked at the sergeant's face one last time. He was already cutting the tape on the next box, his jaw working rhythmically on his gum. Thump, scratch, rip. The monster was just a clerk. The rain had stopped when they emerged from the warehouse. The air was cold, stripped clean by the storm, leaving a sky of bruised purple over the Pacific. Keiko walked slowly, the cardboard box heavy in her arms. 11 pounds of miracles. Around her, the other women were silent, hugging their parcels as if they were newborn children. She looked down at the box. On the side, stamped in black ink, was the logo, Comité International de la Croix-Rouge. For years, Keiko had been taught that the American spirit was weak because it was cluttered with rules, laws, and soft sentiments. She had believed that their strength lay only in their machines. But back there, in the smell of sawdust and coffee, she had seen a different kind of strength. It was a terrifying discipline. It was a soldier who would pause a war machine to find a single tin of milk, not because he cared, but because it was written down. They did not hate her enough to break the rules, and that realized fact broke something inside her, the hard, sharp knot of hatred she had carried since Saipan. "Tanaka-san?" Aiko's voice was soft. She was walking beside Keiko, clutching her repaired box. Why did he do that? Why did he give it back? Keiko stopped. She looked at the guard towers, the barbed wire, and the distant lights of San Francisco shimmering across the bay. The enemy was vast, unknowable, and strange. But they were not beasts. "Because," Keiko said, her voice steady for the first time in months, "the count must match the list." She adjusted her grip on the box. It was just inventory, but it was her inventory now. "Let's go, Aiko," Keiko said. "We have chocolate to eat." She took the first step toward the barracks, no longer marching, just walking. The war was over. The ledger was balanced.